Welcome to the fourth tutorial video for SPSS. Today we'll be graphing two or more variables. I'll be illustrating bar graphs and scatter plots specifically, as well as options within each of these graphing styles. On the screen, you may have noticed that we're using the same data that we used in video 3, indicating the type of therapy that participants are in, using a control therapy, CBT, or humanistic. All participants also have a depression score at time 1 and time 2, as well as optimism and socioeconomic scores and participant sex. First, we'll illustrate a simple frequency graph by using analyze, descriptive statistics, and frequencies. Here you can see that I've already selected over therapy type, and under the charts option, we'll want to select histograms. In this case, let's not overlay a normal curve and simply look at a histogram for the frequency of which type of therapy people are participating in. When we click continue and OK, you'll see that the output gives us both the frequency in counts as well as a graph, a histogram graph of how many people participated in each type of therapy. Let's look at the same thing using optimism. We'll go to, again, analyze, descriptive statistics, and frequencies. Instead of therapy type, let's use our optimism scores. And under our chart menu, let's now select a normal curve on the histogram. When we continue and you view the new graph, you'll see that this data are relatively normally distributed. Again, that didn't make a lot of sense when we only had 3 categories for therapy, but in this case we'd like to see that our frequency charts relatively fit the normal curve. One other option I'd like to show you in a bar graph is how to make this gray background area turn white. This is helpful for printing so you don't use so much ink in terms of printing on a white page. To do this, we'll double-click the graph, which opens the chart editor. We can click on the chart itself, then right-click to get to a properties window. Here we can select the fill, which is now gray, and choose white. Once we apply, you'll see the graph itself change to a white background. We can also choose the borders and patterns, things like that. But for now I simply wanted to show you the graph itself. Now the histograms here are nice for getting the frequencies within variables, but what if we want to use a bar graph where we actually plot, for example, optimism scores for people in different types of therapy? We can't use the frequency window for that, so we'll go under the graphs option and legacy dialogues and bar. In this case we'll choose a simple bar graph. And for our category axis, again we'll choose therapy type. At the top, the number of cases is the default option. This would show the frequency. In our case, we're going to go to other statistics and we'll look at optimism scores. We'll make sure that the statistic we're looking at is the value of means. Okay, we could also choose others as you see, but it's selecting the mean. This graph will give us the mean of optimism for each therapy type. Under options, it's important to choose display error bars. This isn't automatically displayed, but when I click on it, we can get standard error bars, which are required for all APA formatted bar graphs. Once we click OK, you'll see that our new graph, as I select down lower, our new graph includes the mean of optimism for each therapy type, those who are not in therapy, those who are in CBT therapy, as well as our humanistic therapy, and error bars representing 2 standard deviations from the optimism score for each group. Again, we could make the background white if we wanted to instead of gray, but I simply wanted to illustrate the bar graphs along with the standard error bars. So whereas bar graphs are useful for illustrating mean scores on some continuous variable for each level of a categorical variable, what if we had 2 continuous variables? To graph 2 continuous variables against one another, we need to use a scatter plot. Under the Graphs menu, we'll again go to Legacy Dialogues and scroll all the way to the bottom, or near the bottom, for Scatter Plot. In this case, we'll choose a simple scatter plot because we'll only be using 2 variables. For this example, let's choose optimism along the x-axis and choose depression, let's say at time 1, along the y-axis. Of course, we would expect depression and optimism to not be related. We can look under the options to make sure that we're getting everything we need. Once we click OK, you can see that our new graph down below creates a scatter plot, or the data, every person's score, right, each individual person's score along the optimism, or the x-axis, as well as the depression at time 1, or y-axis. The scatter plot itself can be useful to look at, but let's actually add a few options to it. If we double click to open our chart editor, the first thing I want to insert is a line of best fit. Now we'll use some of the menu commands here. If you highlight, if I scroll over this, it tells you to add fit line at total. This means a regression line or a line of best fit. When I select this option, you can see that a number of properties is chosen here. Do I want it to be linear? In this case we do. And I'll simply close this box. Here you can see our line of best fit. For our graph, you can see that it's sloping downward, which indicates a negative correlation between optimism and depression, as we would expect. Another useful feature of a bar graph, we might say, who is this person who has a low optimism score and a high depression score? To find out who this is, I can select this target or data label mode. And when I click on that person, it tells me it's case number 20. Now I could go back to my data file itself and look at who is case number 20 to determine whether this is an outlier for keeping or excluding into the data themselves. So this shows you how to create a line of best fit as well as identify individual cases. The final thing I want to teach you about graphs is how to make them a bit smaller. Under the Edit menu, you can select to rescale the chart. When I click on this, you'll see this new highlighted odd-looking kind of mouse cursor. And I can shrink the chart down. It'll ask me to say OK, and it zooms in considerably. And if instead of looking to zoom in, you simply want to shrink the graph for printing, we'll close out of the chart editor. And here you can see that there's a small box that turns yellow when I select over it. If you're not selected on that, you can simply click on the box. In the corners, if you scroll over and get in a window, you can actually make the chart considerably smaller. If you want to print several charts, this can really help save a lot of page space.